Good morning. It's Friday, December 12th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 799 days old. I'm your host, Shana Meyerson. Welcome back to the Yoga of War podcast. I'll be talking Turkey with today's guest, FDD scholar and Morning Brief host, Jonathan Schanzer. So stay tuned for that conversation coming your way in just a few minutes. By the way, if you appreciate and find value in these important discussions, please consider supporting the show so I can continue to bring you such amazing and esteemed guests. Details are pinned in the comments below. Now for some quick headlines. Headline 1. Just before Thanksgiving, Donald Trump began the long overdue process of designating the Muslim Brotherhood as a foreign terrorist organization, but he decided to pardon the turkey. That's the whole headline. Do you have something to add?
All right, I'll give you one from my angle here. How about Vladimir Putin meeting with Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the president of Turkey. So you got a summit between Turkish and Russian leaders. It was all friendly, and it really looked like a finger in the eye to the United States and all of NATO. So I will just say this, and it's a theme: worst NATO ally ever.
Not even a competition. Headline 3. Last Friday, U.S. Ambassador Tom Barrack affirmed that within 4 to 6 months, Turkey may be eligible for F-35s and all the other effing things that should never fall into the hands of a madman like Erdogan.
Effing things. I like that. Well,
Thank you.
I would say actually, maybe along those lines, apparently in discussions with the United States, the Turks have indicated that they are not willing to part ways yet with the Russian-made S-400 system that they bought back in 2017. You'll remember that back then, after they bought the system, they were kicked out of the effing F-35 program. And the whole idea was is that they could get back in it if they just got rid of the effing S-400. They have not done it, and now they're still refusing to, even as discussions have started to ramp up again. So once again, let me just turn back to that refrain: worst NATO ally ever.
I understand the refrain. Let me just say, breaking up is hard to do. Headline number 5, the final headline. 2 weeks ago, the Peace Pope kicked off his tour of terrorists in Turkey. He came and met with an imam, a priest, and a rabbi. Why the rabbi, you ask? Because he couldn't finish the joke without him. Huh?
Well played.
That was my best one. Both of my parents, like, literally were like, don't get it. Do you get
Well,
it? That
well
was good.
played. I
Thank
was
you.
going to ask, where's the joke? But
The whole thing is the joke. And now, folks, to my conversation with Jonathan Schanzer. Dr. Jonathan Schanzer is the executive director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, where he oversees the work of the organization's experts and scholars and hosts the FDD Morning Brief. Jonathan previously worked as a terrorism finance analyst at the U.S. Department of Treasury, where he followed and froze the funding of Hamas and al-Qaeda. Jonathan has held previous think tank research positions at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and the Middle East Forum. He has written hundreds of articles on the Middle East and U.S. national security. His most recent book is Gaza Conflict 2021, Hamas, Israel, and the 11 Days of War. Jonathan testifies often before Congress and appears on television channels such as CNN, Fox News, BBC, and NBC, and podcasts such as the Yoga of War. Yeah? Welcome to the Yoga of War podcast, Jonathan Schanzer. And congratulations on 300 episodes of the FDD Morning Brief. I want you to know I come bearing greetings from my partner in super top secret and highly lucrative Mossad war crime, Andrew Fox.
All right, that's awesome. Well, great to be with you. And yeah, today was actually number 300 for my podcast, which is insane because it's all just been a blur and it wasn't even supposed to be a podcast. The funny thing is that I had actually created it because I was giving the same briefing starting at around 6 o'clock in the morning. This is right after the war began. I'd brief somebody at 6 and then 6:30 and 7 and 7:30 and 8 and 8:30 and it kept going. And I was saying the same thing over and over again. I said, you know what? I'm just going to record this. And then it was like, oh, well, maybe I should bring on a guest. And then it was like, oh, maybe I should have a monologue. And the next thing you know, there's a structure to the show, and it's a show. I the really crazy thing is I don't even listen to podcasts most of the time. I try to watch Israeli news to stay up on what's going on. And anyway, I guess I'm an accidental content creator.
Well, first of all, if you like round numbers, this is episode 90 of the Yoga of War. So it's
Congrats.
all around round right now. And I have to tell you, this podcast was also an accident. By a weird chain of events, not even a weird chain of events, there was no chain. I wound up chatting with John Spencer totally randomly. And I'm like, oh my goodness. I have this podcast. Would you be willing to come on? And he's like, yes. And I'm like, great. I didn't have a podcast. He was my first guest, and that is where it all began.
Fake
So
it till you make it, right?
that's right. And I've faked it pretty far. I've had such amazing, amazing guests. It's such a thrill to have you today. I want you to know, as far as the world of podcasts is concerned, you are absolutely one of my top three go-tos. So thank you so much for that.
I'm honored.
Oh, you should be. Shana Meyerson, the yoga instructor in Los Angeles, California, puts you in the top three. That is like, you probably should print that up in some sort of certificate.
I'm gonna put it on my business card.
Okay, to kick things off today, I think that in order to understand Turkey, honestly, we first need to understand the man behind the curtain. So, who is Erdogan really, and how has he redefined Turkey in the past, honestly, 22 years?
Yeah, so more than 2 decades now. A guy who even you got like maybe back up for a second and just understand that the modern state of Turkey was designed to be a Western country,
That's right.
secular, democratic, kind of oriented toward Europe, oriented toward the United States. Imperfect country, the way that it's been run, multiple coups and a lot of tumult, political tumult. But at the end of the day, it belonged inside NATO. It was designed to be a bulwark against the kind of craziness of the Middle East and also to be a counter towards Russia, which, as I already indicated, is absolutely not happening right now. But what happened with Erdogan is, the guy comes to power in the early 2000s and he's Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, it's the AK party, as it's known, the AKP. And they are absolutely Islamist oriented, not Islamically oriented, but Islamist. So in other words, supporters of all manner of bad actors. And that's really what we've watched over the last 20 years is that Erdogan has sort of moved the country slowly, steadily, inexorably toward Islamist causes, radical jihadist causes. So Hamas becomes one of them. The Muslim Brotherhood, al-Qaeda, ISIS, the Islamic Republic of Iran. It kind of seems like there's just no bad actor on the planet from that Islamist universe that he won't work with. And so slowly but surely, Turkey becomes less secular, less democratic. And by the way, when we talk about democracy in Turkey, he's eviscerated it, really. You look at the way that he's jailed his competition, including right now, his main competitor, political competitor, he's put in jail for no good reason. He has eviscerated the judiciary. He has destroyed the media, and the man's been in power for 22 years. So this doesn't look like a democracy any longer. This looks like an Islamist autocracy. And it really has no business being in NATO. We have
Hmm.
no business having military assets there. And we should be thinking about this country as an enemy, not an ally. But yet, in this town where I live in Washington, in the swamp, we're still stuck in these kind of old paradigms, and they really need to be broken.
Absolutely. And I would put Israel in that same swamp that needs to break some paradigms. But I'd like to get into NATO a little bit later. I do want to stack on what you're saying. Yes, it's a secular state, it's a secular constitution. It's also 99% Muslim. So, according to Turkish figures. So, there's always that thing of like, there's Muslim states and there's Islamic states, right? They're not necessarily, or they're not the same thing. But for the last decade or so, we have like really seen this. I'd like to call it a creeping Islamization because I can't think of another word but creeping. But like, what's creeping really fast? What would be the word? I don't know. Like something like this
Uh,
of Turkey. But do you see any scenario wherein like Turkey undergoes an Islamic transformation as dramatic as the one that befell Iran in 1979 without even needing like a coup?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you bring up Iran because the great scholar of Islam, Bernard Lewis, famously said, I don't know, it was probably 20 years ago, that one day Iran will be Turkey and Turkey will be Iran. In
Hmm.
other words, you see this process through which the Iranian people are growing steadily angry and frustrated with their government. And there's a high likelihood, given the very pro-Western sentiment that we see across the Islamic Republic in a very young population, that, they want to become kind of what Turkey has traditionally been, which is an ally of the West in a more secular regime, hopefully a democracy. And in Turkey, they're going the exact other way. And it's just been, you could sort of imagine like sort of, two lines on a graph, and they're just sort of like, they're crossing over each other in exactly the wrong ways. I mean, the right way, I hope anyway, with the Islamic Republic of Iran. But we're watching the evolution of the Islamic Republic of Turkey. And a fast creep is a good way of putting it. It's sort of like a tarantula on coke, right? I mean, this idea is just like, it should be moving a lot more slowly than it is. But instead, what you're watching is this guy. I mean, he's transformed the country to the point, actually, right now, where the experts that I talk to, and I'm not an expert on the political and domestic stuff that goes on in Turkey. I'm a terror finance watcher, and I'm just watching all of these horrible things that Turkey supports because of Erdogan. But what's amazing is you can now see these people are getting drawn out into the streets, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people at times protesting the Gaza war on like in fact, not just like, hey, we're against war, but chanting pro-Hamas slogans,
Yeah.
overtly Islamist, violent rhetoric. And that's the stuff that makes me very nervous.
So to be clear, when you're talking about this graph, you're talking about the graph of the populace, not the graph of the leadership, because the leadership are both going straight up to radical Islam.
Yeah, I mean, but I think it's sort of like where the government is possibly trending, where the
Hmm.
populace is possibly trending.
Hmm.
But the thing that people worry about right now, and I think it's a real worry, is, Erdogan is, he can't live forever. There's
Right.
only one guy that can live forever, and that's Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority. That guy's been dying for like 30 years and
Right.
still won't kick the bucket. But everybody that I know tells me that Erdogan's ill, that that he struggled with, I think it was stomach cancer, and he's still not healthy. And but the question is, let's say he finally does depart the scene.
Hmm. Hmm.
Has he done too much damage to
Right.
Turkey for the country to turn around? And that's like the real troubling question that people don't know how to answer right now.
I think that's the real troubling question, honestly, for the entire world. I mean, not just even the Middle East, not just this Islamist countries, but even the West. So I think we're all asking that question, just fill in the blank with the name of the country.
Oh yeah, and look, I mean, without getting into too much politics here, I mean, our parties are unrecognizable here in
Yeah.
the United States in terms of ideologically. There's no discipline any longer. I don't think that the Democratic Party is liberal. I don't think that the Republican Party is conservative, not in the ways that
Yeah.
we once knew. So these sorts of transformations absolutely are taking place. And you look at Israel, they're going through their own tumult, not just from the war, but from a lot of the other sort of trends that
Hmm.
that have taken over. So absolutely good point. But with Turkey, I think you can narrow it down to a man
Yep.
that has fundamentally transformed the country in highly negative ways.
Yeah, and he obviously has these Neo-Ottoman ambitions, but I have a weird question actually.
They're
That
all weird when it comes to the Middle East. So no need to preface.
I think you say they're all weird when it comes to me, because that's what Andrew would say.
Oh yeah, well that too. But I mean, I work in Middle East issues, so every question's weird. Yeah.
Okay. I think in directions sometimes that maybe most people don't think in, but here's the question that comes up for me. You were talking about how Turkey has been uniquely positioned, right, to bridge the Western world with the Muslim one. My question, I guess, is as they move deeper and deeper into the Islamic camp, I understand that that's going to help their neo-Ottoman ambitions, but do you see that special status as the bridge builder dissipating? I mean, it may actually backfire on them, wouldn't it? Like, how might that affect their regional power if they no longer serve as this bridge?
So okay. Um, I think there was a moment where Barack Obama tried to wield Turkey as a bridge. It
Mhm.
was the Arab Spring. You'll recall it erupts in 2010, 2011, and it goes on for a bunch of years. And it's Muslim Brotherhood, Islamist, organic grassroots movements challenging the autocratic regimes across the Middle East. And Muslim Brotherhood is at the forefront of this. The Qataris are the bankrollers. They're the money behind all of this. And the Turks are kind of like the ideological drivers and in some cases, organizers on the ground.
Hmm.
And that's the moment where Barack Obama really starts to engage with Erdogan. And at the time, this was like 20, I don't know, 13, 2014, people were saying that Erdogan was the leader that Obama spoke to most as he was trying to guide the Arab Spring to a soft landing, right? Where you
Okay.
weren't going to see a whole bunch of countries in complete and total tumult, and that Erdogan was seen as the guy that could help make that happen. Um, that falls apart, and I think for obvious reasons, but
Hmm.
not just that all these movements were bad news, but also, Erdogan, there's this Gezi Park protest for anybody that's interested in looking it up, do a quick Google, but the government starts dealing with its own kind of Arab Spring, people coming out into the streets protesting the way that the government functions in Turkey, and they deal with it with total brutality. And it just makes Erdogan toxic. He no longer looks like the guy that can do this. He looks like all the other Arab thugs that are being protested all around the Middle East. And so that moment ends. And I would say that over the last, gosh, like 8, 10 years, no one's really thought about the government of Turkey as a bridge to anything. It's a bridge to nowhere, right? But now it's interesting because I actually don't think that anybody looks at Erdogan as this good guy that's going to make things better in the region. If anything, right now, the U.S. engagement with him is based on sort of two things. One is he has a bromance with Donald Trump. Donald Trump, we all know he has a thing for strongmen in the Middle East. The guy, he likes Ahmed al-Shara, the guy that used to be
Yeah.
al-Qaeda that now runs Syria. That's there's a trend there. Let's just leave it there. But then the other part of it is on September 9th of this year, the Israelis attack Qatar. They try to kill the top Hamas leaders.
Sure.
They're all congregated in this apartment building, and the Israelis try to take them out with one bomb. They miss their intended targets. However, it scares the chara out of the Qataris because they just realize they're the eighth front in the war, and they don't want that to happen. So they go running to Trump and they say, "We want a security guarantee from the United States." And he says, "Okay, you want that? Fine. You're going to have to make a deal that ends the war and get all the hostages back." And he starts leaning on both the Qataris and the Turks. Why? Because they're the top sponsors of Hamas in the Middle East outside of Iran. And they're the ones that have been kind of running interference for Hamas for the last 2 years. They are kind of forced to start to play the role of the good guy, if I can call it that.
Yep.
They're the peacemakers. And so Erdogan's role right now, he's not trying to build a bridge. And in fact, if anything, he's still calling for, taking action against Israel. I mean, he'd love to build some kind of pan-Islamic army and his Neo-Ottoman ambitions. That's part of what he actually has been advocating for. But he's been asked to end the war and to deliver Hamas. I'm not sure he does it, but that's why he is in the role that he's in right now. But I mean, I think the broader thing to just understand when we talk about Turkey is, I don't know if they were ever seen as the bridge between East and West, even though you literally have a little piece of Turkey in Europe and the rest of it in Asia. And it's a natural kind of thing to think about. But I actually think it was more of a buffer, that they were not designed to try to make everybody sing Kumbaya, but they were like the front door, right? That needed to stay closed as it related to the Middle East. Like keep, all these other, kind of nasty Islamist elements out of Europe. But what we've actually seen is since the Syrian civil war, they've actually opened that door and they've allowed for massive numbers of refugees to flood into Europe. And the Europeans fear Turkey for this reason. Many of them hate Turkey for this reason, but they don't have much choice, given that if he wants to flood the Europeans with refugees, he can, and so you got to play nice if you don't want that to continue.
Yeah, you do have to play nice, and that's a great encapsulation of sort of like the broader dynamics surrounding Turkey. I want to look really honestly briefly because there's so much more important points to get into, but just as sort of the history of Turkey and Israel, because it's not as straightforward as many people would think. I'm going to start with just a very, very recent event and then sort of move backwards a little bit. But last week, the Knesset actually dedicated an urgent, like cross-party debate focused exclusively on the Turkish threat to Israel. I want to share a quote by MK Ohad warning that Turkey is, quote, rapidly and powerfully becoming a threat that in the not too distant future could be much greater even than the Iranian threat. So I want to just stack on something that you said 2 or 3 times actually in your last response, which is, so we have this Trump Erdogan bromance. By the way, that mixtape, it's time to eject it. Like, this is just ridiculous. I don't understand like why Trump is so cozy with these people. But my bigger question is, how can Israel continue to call them an ally? And I guess more importantly, can Israel diplomatically afford not to call them an ally? Turkey, not America.
Right. So Israel does not call them an ally.
They don't call them an enemy.
They just don't call them an enemy. And I'm just back from Israel. I just got back on a week ago.
Yeah.
And we had some fascinating conversations with top people across the system. They don't want another enemy. I mean, they really don't. They got enough, right?
Sure.
Right? Like, as one senior Israeli official I talked to a few years ago about Turkey said, if they want to fight with us, they're gonna have to get in line. Right? I mean, because there's literally like how many other people you have to get through? They already have ongoing wars with with Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and and the Islamic Republic and nobody wants this.
Yeah.
Okay, but what's happening is that when you look around the region right now, as the Iranian star possibly begins to fade,
Fade.
they're watching the Turks try to move in
Yeah.
and to take advantage of a vacuum of sorts. So we're seeing, the Turks they want boots on the ground in Gaza. That's
Yep.
insane.
Yep.
Okay. I mean, to think that you would put the patron of Hamas in Gaza right on Israel's doorstep, this is not a recipe for calm. Um, we're hearing that the Turks are actually helping Hezbollah,
Yeah.
which that's bizarre because Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy, and it's Shiite, and the Turks are Sunni. So nobody understands what the hell is going on there, but it's happening. And we're hearing it from that, the Turks are in Syria as well, and they are putting military and intelligence assets on the ground as a means to threaten Israel effectively.
Hmm.
So then you start to look at what you have is this crescent. We always used to talk about the Shiite crescent stretching from Iran to Iraq to Syria to Lebanon. It's now stretching from Turkey to Syria to Lebanon and
Hmm.
possibly to Gaza.
Yep.
It does not look, all is not well. But yeah, they don't want, the Israelis don't want to call them an enemy. But let me just say, when you look at the behavior of
Hmm.
Turkey
Yep.
since, I'm going to put it at 2000, I think it was 2009. That was the first time it popped up on my radar that it
Yeah.
was a potential problem. Erdogan is, I think it might have been 2007. Erdogan starts slamming Shimon Peres at the Davos conference, calling him a murderer. Nobel Prize laureate calls him a murderer, right? Then in 2010, you have the famous
Mavi
flotilla
Marmara. Yep.
incident, the Mavi Marmara, right, where you have a Turkish flotilla that's trying to essentially pierce Israeli territorial waters, and the Israelis board these ships, and clashes break out. Um, and then you have the Gilad Shalit prisoner swap, where a huge number of Hamas prisoners with blood on their hands find their way to Turkey. That's where they're sent. Then you start to see this Hamas headquarters begin to grow,
Hmm.
and to the point that top military leaders are based there and claiming credit for attacks, including most famously the attack that there was that triple homicide of three teens in the West Bank back in 2014. That was the thing that spawned the 2014 war for 51 days between Israel and Hamas. And it was this guy, Salah Harori, was based in Turkey. He was the guy that ordered that attack and financed it and planned it. Um, and then, after that, it gets even messier because we start to see the Turks doing money laundering for Iran at the height of the nuclear program dispute. This is like the U.S. trying to stop all money from going to Iran, and the Turks just come in and just blow the whole thing up. You have an Islamic State problem that's growing in neighboring Syria, and it turns out the Turks have opened up their border to allow
Hmm.
for all these fighters to stream through, and money and weapons. And you just get a sense here that the Turks they've picked the wrong side
Yep.
in just about every issue that could negatively impact Israeli security. And then, of course, you have the attacks of 10/7, where Erdogan refuses to call, to this day, that he refuses to call Hamas a terrorist organization. He's hosting Hamas leaders during the war, giving them red carpet treatment. So yeah, they are enemies of Israel. Israel is just kind of holding back for as long as they can from saying so, for fear of what it means when they say so out loud. This is the second largest army in NATO. It's a massive country
Yeah.
with an unhinged leader. who literally, I mean, this guy, I got to tell you, not everybody's Hitler. I know everybody thinks that everybody's Hitler, and we talk about it all. Oh, that guy's as bad as Hitler. Erdogan, when you listen to his rhetoric, he is anti-Semitic and he is militaristic. And that scares me. He's
Yeah.
right up there with Ali Khamenei.
Yeah. So I just want to ask one clarifying question before moving on. Yeah, strange bedfellows seems to be a theme in the world today, and Shiite and oh,
Sunni.
Sunni. Huh, my mind. Never be a woman over 50, Jonathan. I'm telling you, it's not that fun. These alliances, I think that as long as they hate Israel, it's all good. So I'm curious though, like, so how would you like classify Turkey's current relationship with Iran? Partnership or power struggle?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, I
moving
mean, no, I
on.
mean, it's an interesting thing, right? I mean, they have they shared a proxy. They both took part in cultivating Hamas. And now, the Turks are helping Hezbollah. That's not nothing. They helped Iran evade those sanctions, that I mentioned.
Hmm.
That was 2012 to 2015. In other words, you have a fairly long history now of some cooperation. That said, um, Iran's loss
Hmm.
looks like Turkey's gain.
Right.
And I think it's also important to remember that the Turks, they understand their place in this world. They are the Sunni actors. The Sunnis are 80% of the Muslim world. They are the majority here. And they could probably galvanize a heck of a lot more just in terms of sheer numbers than Iran ever could. Iran's biggest problem was they were Shiites trying to galvanize the Sunni world. Not easy to do. This will be easier if they choose to do it. So yeah, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, this is a very dangerous foe that is now beginning to show itself here in the wake of the October 7 wars.
Yeah.
And I have taken to calling them wars, right? Because Israel was fighting on
Because they
seven
are.
fronts. You can maybe say that they fought an eighth front for one day with the Qataris, but then there's like there's the media war, there's
Hmm.
the legal war,
Right.
and then there's this question of like, are the Turks going to announce themselves as another front? There's a lot
Exactly.
happening here. I know everybody talks about um, the war being over. That's how Donald Trump framed it.
Yeah.
It's not
Well,
over, like not by a long shot. We're at a ceasefire, and it's a
yeah.
tenuous ceasefire. And at some point, it kind of feels like that rubber band's going to have to snap back.
Sure.
And so I'm watching all of this and trying to make sense of it. At least 3 days a week when I'm doing
Yeah.
the podcast.
Yes. So I guess so that clarifies that yes, partnership and power struggle. I want to like focus on that since October 7th, there has been tremendous focus, of course, on Iran and the IRGC being the number one state sponsor of terror. We've been saying that for years and years. The head of the snake, the head of the octopus, whatever the thing, the flame that lit the terrorist ring of fire around Israel. But now that ring of fire has been reduced to basically embers, where the question is like, who's gonna step in to reignite this maelstrom? I mean, Iran, of course, is hoping that they will be able to recapture these proxies and regain control of the area. But much more likely, of course, will be Qatar and Turkey. So I actually want to ask, though, is it possible to sort of discuss Turkey without bringing Qatar into the conversation, or is like Turkey basically the one geopolitical entity these days? Just they move in a clump, one soft power, one's hard power.
So the way that I describe, well, actually, two things. One, just to go back on, I don't think we're looking only at the embers of the Iranian axis. I think there are still fronts that could very easily ignite at the
Mm-hmm.
direction of the regime. And I think that's just important for listeners and
Okay.
viewers to understand. Hezbollah still has a lot of long distance missiles that they haven't used. The Houthis, they're just abiding by the ceasefire. They don't have to. The Iranians, we're hearing that their ballistic missile capabilities are back up to pre-war levels. And Hamas hasn't stopped fighting. I think it's weaker than it was, but it hasn't stopped fighting, and it can still do some damage here. And in fact, an Egyptian official said as much today. So I don't want anybody to walk away with this idea that, hey, like, Iran's out, down for the count. No, it could come back, and the only question is, are they willing to risk it? Because if they do try to come back, the Israelis are not going to stop as they did last time. They just won't. I mean, they're going to play for keeps. So there's that, and then then I think when we look at Turkey and Qatar, and I keep wanting to say I have a new nickname for Tucker Carlson. He's Turkey Qatarlson. And I keep wanting to say Turkey Qatarlson, but no, Turkey and Qatar
Yeah.
are they're an axis,
Yeah.
right? They are, it's an alliance that they have in pursuit of a more Sunni oriented, Islamist oriented Arab world, Muslim world. Um, I see them as the kind of competition to what I would call the Abraham Accords,
Mm-hmm.
or Abraham adjacent countries. So Saudi, obviously not Abraham Accord, but still pragmatic, along with the Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco. I don't know where exactly I would put Jordan and Egypt, but I guess they're adjacent to this. But then you have the Qataris and the Turks trying to challenge their worldview, their more pragmatic worldview. And so if you kind of look at the tug of war, the balance of power in the region right now, you're looking at, the Iranian axis, the Muslim Brotherhood axis, and the pragmatic Arab states.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I look at it is this competition, it's not fully out in the open here. But what happens between these three kind of poles could really determine the future of the Middle East for decades to come.
Sure. So I I guess so Erdogan is clearly, whether he gets control of this Ring of Fire or not, he definitely has his eye on the ring. Um, I'm wondering though that as he looks at this sprawling Muslim world, as an opportunity for his own expansionist goals, and there's this one teeny tiny blemish on this entire tapestry. I'm wondering, is Israel an enemy by virtue of ideology or just unfortunate geography?
If you're an Islamist, you believe that Israel should not exist.
Right.
You believe that Israeli control over Israel, over Jerusalem, um, is not legitimate and contested by the word of God. There is this terminology in Islam. They refer to this land as waqf,
Mhm.
Waqf.
It's a great
Um,
Scrabble word, by the way.
oh, really? It
Yeah.
works in
Oh my God,
it's
it's
in
one of
this.
the best.
Okay, yeah, it would be a really good one. Um, uh, Waqf basically means if it was Islamic at any point, it is Islamic in perpetuity.
Hmm.
And this is essentially the thinking of Erdogan, of the Emir of Qatar, Tamim, certainly the Ayatollahs in Iran. I I think there was a time where the Saudis maybe officially looked at it that way. I think they seem to be walking back from that,
Hmm.
which is actually really good. If you've ever, I don't know if you've seen, but there's a guy, his name's Mohammed Al Isa. He's at the World Muslim League in Saudi Arabia, and I think they're kind of, let's just say they're much more open to Jews in the kingdom than they
Mm-hmm.
ever were,
Mm-hmm.
and even Jews that are pro-Israel, they're okay with. They may not love everything that pro-Israel people have to say, but they are willing to listen, and that's very different, I think, than where we are with Erdogan and Tamim. But it really actually, I should just say here that what's so fascinating to me is, we're having this conversation and you're hearing what the Israelis are saying and you're watching the news and you clearly understand that you need to devote a whole podcast episode to this growing challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And I have friends and colleagues here in Washington that for many years kind of threw their lot with Turkey, thought of it as this buffer state, this moderate, pragmatic, Western oriented country. And they refuse to pivot, even as Erdogan continues
Mm-hmm.
to openly put a finger in their eye. Just it's like they're just not willing to accept the reality. And for the last 15 years, I have been pointing to that litany of crimes committed by this regime and by this one man in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been derided. And I have
Yeah.
colleagues and friends who are also equally derided
Yeah.
for having the audacity to point out this rap sheet. People
Yeah.
say, oh, it's a rap sheet. You don't understand geopolitics. Actually, no, I do understand
Right.
geopolitics. And sometimes geopolitics change.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to pivot if you want to stay afloat. And I think that there is just a fundamental disconnect here in Washington with a lot of the so-called experts
Yeah.
on Turkey. And I don't understand all the domestic stuff, and I don't want to. I can't read Turkish. I can barely pronounce some of these names. It drives me crazy, right? But when I look at the actions of this government, the foreign policy of
Mm-hmm.
this government, the actions of this man,
Yep.
the rhetoric of this man, it becomes beyond a shadow of a doubt for me where this country is going. People don't say these things and then just kidding, psych. That's not how this works. This guy clearly has designs on the rest of the region, clearly has a hatred for Israel, clearly is supporting terrorist states and terrorist groups. That should be enough for all of us.
I think, Jonathan, to be honest, pivot is a word that could be thrown into the dustbin of history and it needs to be replaced with entrenchment. Not just entrenchment, but polarization. And a lot of this has to do with social media and the fact that we're all pushed so deeply into our corners and all of us have a public record of everything that we have ever said. And the more that it's equal and opposite reaction. The more someone pushes on our ideals, the more we're gonna, I do too. Like I always joke with Andrew when we're on the thing. I'm like, you know that I'm saying this with 100% bias about Israel. Like I don't make any bones about my blue and white colored glasses. They don't change. And it's true. Like I really do try to stay objective. I really do. I think I'm rare in my level of self-reflection, but I would be lying if I said that it doesn't come with certain prejudices. And when especially in Washington, when your whole entire career depends on being right, then there is no pivoting. All you can do is double down.
I mean, yes, but no. I mean, I mean, look, when I first got into this business, I moved to Washington in 2002.
Mm-hmm.
I visited Turkey a bunch.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw it as the place where you go after you visit the hellholes. You go and you go drink and you enjoy a kind of a more Western oriented Muslim country. And how cool is that? And and it's a beautiful country. It's gorgeous. And but when you start to see this stuff, now granted, I didn't make a career out of, being a Turkey analyst. I have been just studying the region.
Mm-hmm.
But there does come a moment where you say, nope, I'm gonna switch. And
Yeah.
it's controversial when you do it. People switch parties. They pick, look at how many people have turned their back on Israel. where they've changed their position. They were pro-Israel and now they're against
Mm-hmm.
Israel. People make those changes
Mm-hmm.
all the time. They're feasible. But you have to see things clearly and be willing to say it's time to pivot. It's
Yep.
time to move.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I just don't see it happening. So that being said, let's get back into Trump, Qatar, Turkey, the fabulous three, the three musketeers. We all know, obviously, that Qatar and Turkey, we do owe them a certain debt of gratitude because it was their pressure that brought Hamas to the 20-point table. Whatever carrots and sticks were used in that process, we got home all of our living hostages and all but one, Ron Gavili, of the murdered hostages. That was a very important role that they played. It was important to me personally. But how can Trump like hit the release valve before even phase one is completed? And even as the Hamas coalition has all but shredded the rest of the 20-point document.
Um, Look, I don't know where the ceasefire goes. Um, I I think that it's complicated. I think Trump is trying to remake the Middle East, and
Mm-hmm.
he's got big ambitions here. I mean, he wants to eviscerate Iran, and I think he got a good head start.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he's trying to weaken all of their proxies and trying to extinguish that ring of fire. Um, and then he's trying to enlist America's allies to help him kind of finish this and maybe start something new, build back toward the
Mm-hmm.
Abraham Accords, things like that. I think he's picked two of the wrong players. Um, but I'm going to actually say something, maybe I'll make a bigger, broader observation. I have a big chunk of research coming out, written with some colleagues. It'll come out next month. But the essence of it is that our entire alliance structure in the Middle East is not healthy. Um, I would argue that, parts of it looked quite good during the course of the 12-day war and the two other Iranian attacks on Israel, one in October and the other one in April of last year, where the Iranians were firing ballistic missiles, and a whole bunch of CENTCOM countries around the Middle East, including the Saudis and the Jordanians and others, were actually shooting down the missiles and the drones. And so in that sense, the alliance structure, at least it functions, right,
Mm-hmm.
from a military perspective. But you know, when you think about our top allies right now in the region, you got the Turks, NATO allies that are Hamas supporters, Iran supporters, ISIS supporters, al-Qaeda supporters. They're really just terrible, right? Like they should not be in our alliance.
Right.
And then you got the Qataris. And I mean, I always joke that Qatar is like the cantina scene in Star Wars. It's like all the worst actors in the universe converge upon this place. Um, and they're just as bad as the Turks, and they're major non-NATO allies.
Yeah.
We have our largest air base in the Middle East over there, and it's
Right.
just an insane arrangement. But then you go a little further, right? You look at Oman, right? That's a country where we rely on them for things. We've got some military assets there. They're supposed to be, they call themselves the Switzerland of the Middle East, and we work with them. And they have a Houthi headquarters in Oman. So what's going on there with
Right.
this ally structure? Got a problem there. How about Egypt, right? How about all those tunnels that were found
Right.
sneaking from the Sinai Peninsula into Gaza? And don't forget their nasty rhetoric and all the nasty things that they've been saying over the last 2 years. They have not been acting like friends. If anything, they look like they're, detractors from the alliance. And then finally, you've got Jordan, which is supposed to be, this amazing, loyal country of the United States. By the way, we give the Egyptians a huge amount of money. We give the Jordanians a huge amount of money. The Jordanians don't even want to build a border with Israel to prevent smuggling of weapons and cash from
Mm-hmm.
coming in. Their rhetoric has been indistinguishable from Iran. during this
Yeah,
war. And so when you look around, Turkey's not really an anomaly.
sure.
Turkey is part of a really toxic pattern of crappy allies that we cannot seem to figure out how to get in line. And so the
Hmm.
argument that I'm making is, we whipped the Europeans into shape in many respects after the Ukraine war, right? We basically said everybody needs to start giving more, and you need to be part of this common defense because we can't do this ourselves, and we got to do the same thing with the Middle East. And Israel's not immune from that. There are probably things that Israel can do to be a better ally to the United States, and we can talk about that. But man, all those other countries surrounding Israel, it's insane that we still refer to this as an alliance structure. It is not one. It
Yeah.
is anything but that.
Yeah, it seems like this like new world order that we live in demands that everybody is either a friend or a frenemy or a crappy ally, as you would say. But no one seems to be an actual enemy. No one, not Putin, not Erdogan, not name the person. But I'm just curious what happened to the West war on terror. I don't mean what happened when we left Afghanistan, but I mean, do we not care that the Muslim Brotherhood says out loud that they want to destroy and overcome the West, including America? And Donald Trump is like, and I'm actually a valid independent. This isn't about like Trump bashing, but I don't understand if it's naivete, if it's brilliance. Maybe he's playing this four-dimensional chess that everyone's talking about. I don't hold it past him. So far, I've seen some pretty remarkable things coming out of his strategizing. But it does seem like for the short-term gain of perceived peace in the Middle East, he's willing to sell the ship because after 3 years, oh, it's somebody else's problem. And I think it's going to be a big, big problem, not just for America, but we already see what's going on in the rest of the West.
Yeah. I mean, it's chaos right now. That's for sure. I would argue that there is no Trump doctrine, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we joke that he's the first post-policy president that the United States. I mean, just he has a national security strategy now, but there's not a lot written down about how we're going to pursue any of this, or
Hmm.
the hard and fast rules of
Right.
Trump policy. And so that's a challenge. I will say though, the other side to that is that he is so unpredictable, and not just to our allies, but to our
Hmm.
enemies,
Hmm.
that you have a lot of countries, a lot of regimes that are not willing to trifle with him because they fear his unpredictability. So there's
Hmm.
that's the sort of positive side. The negative is I have no idea what our policy is on Turkey.
Yep.
I have no
Or
idea
if we
why
have one.
I don't have no idea why we're trying to sell them F-35s when we know
Yeah.
everything that they've been doing. The fact that this is even, that this is happening in the first place, to me feels very troubling. I think with a country like Turkey, we should have a declared policy of shunning them until they get on board with a whole host of American policies that they have just refused to hew to. So we've got some serious challenges ahead for sure. And I think that world order, look, politically, the parties are shifting, alliances are shifting, power is shifting, China's rising.
Mhm.
I don't know if the United States is declining, but we certainly feel like we're stagnating a bit. Um, and so, we've got our work cut out for us for sure.
Sure. So in in relation to the F-35s, the word, or it's not a word, it's an acronym that hasn't come up yet, is QME. I mean, it's another consideration that has to be kept in mind. If Turkey I would argue that the Saudis don't pose, at least in the imminent future, any sort of direct existential threat to Israel. They haven't even had any particularly aggressive behaviors towards them. However, Turkey seems intent on destroying the Jewish state. I feel like the I don't necessarily want to see F-35s in the hands of the Saudis, but I think that the QME issue is way bigger when it comes to Turkey. So So they violated these CAATSA sanctions, and if in fact they decide to separate from Russia on the S-400, um, I feel like this would be still an existential threat to Israel. But I'm wondering, Congress has to approve this sale, don't they? I mean, is there any chance that Congress would step in and prevent it from happening?
Yeah, and I mean it's interesting. I just came from a lunch with someone who works on the Hill, and we were talking about exactly that, and I think there is I think a good group of, I'm guessing, Republicans and certainly Democrats that will oppose this.
Mm-hmm.
The question is whether they do it publicly or privately. Um, you have a lot of members that don't, even if they disagree with Trump, they're, maybe not inclined to criticize him publicly. And I think that's kind of the dynamic here, is you may see more quiet pushback, and it's not going to be coming out publicly. But I still question what happens. Sorry about the little noise here. Again, sounds like a fire somewhere in the neighborhood. Not good. Hopefully, but going the opposite way of the White House.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the good news. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think Congress should want to weigh in on this. Um, and of course, QME, you mentioned qualitative military edge. This has been enshrined in American law 3 times,
Mm-hmm.
that the United States will ensure that Israel always has an edge on the battlefield against all of its enemies or possible enemies. So you don't even have to call Turkey an enemy here to want to make sure that they don't get the same kind of tech that Israel currently has that gives it an edge on the battlefield. But the last thing, and we say this to anybody that will listen here at FTD, the last thing what you want are 2 F-35 squaring off over the Med, one Israeli, one Turkish, getting into a firefight. You don't want that. And I fear that that's what we're headed toward if we're not careful.
Yeah, and I have to say, like from my vantage point, it seems like we're living at this juncture in time where every country has to sort of pick a side, Western civilization, or as you guys like to call it there, the axis of aggression. I like to call it the axis of evil. But I know it's a little bit biased. But this potential F-35 sale, which would depend on Turkey abandoning its Russian S-400, seems like an inflection point in this global realignment. So how significant do you think this decision will be in solidifying Ankara's geopolitical stance? I mean, will they be abandoning their relationship with Russia if they decide to go F-35 instead?
Um, they're going to try to do both.
Right. Okay.
I always use this line. It was my Aunt Adele's favorite.
Good old
may,
Aunt Adele.
may she rest in peace. With one tuchus, you can't dance at 2 weddings.
Yes.
And the Turks have been trying to dance at both weddings. The Qataris do it
Mm-hmm.
too. They're very good at it. All right, supporting a terrorist organization while also trying to be an American ally, keeping the S-400 while also trying to acquire the F-35. It's this thing. They all try to do it. If you ask me, if we lower our guards here and allow them to acquire the F-35 while they still have the S-400, we've lost them permanently
Yeah.
as a reliable NATO ally. Now,
Mm-hmm.
we don't have there is no mechanism for kicking a country out of NATO.
Mm-hmm.
As we like to say, it's like the Hotel California. They've checked out, but they will not leave. And this is like, we need to get them back in a way that they're contributing constructively to the alliance. And if we don't do that, then I fear that we're going to see them go on the march in the Middle East, trying to build up more of an established presence in places like Syria and places like Lebanon and places like Gaza. They're already in Iraq,
Mm-hmm.
and we won't have any leverage to get them out. And that's what worries me, that they could become, again, like the Sunni version of Iran, and pose a significant threat to our interests and allies across the Middle East. And then here's the thing that kind of bakes everybody's noodle. Let's say they start really getting aggressive as it relates to Israel. And then
Hmm.
let's say the Israelis decide to, respond.
Right.
Can they invoke Article 5 of NATO, the Mutual Defense Clause? That's insane. All right. I mean, does anybody think that that the West would come to the aid of Turkey if they had a clash with Israel? It doesn't seem likely to me, but it's still within the realm of the possible for people to take NATO seriously. And so anyway, there's a lot hanging in the balance here.
Yeah.
It's not
So,
just right. It's not just, gosh, are they pro America? Are they pro Russia? I mean,
right.
yeah, they could be, like permanently soiling NATO, making it impossible to work within the structure.
So I guess that since Turkey is a NATO member and Israel is a major non-NATO ally, it seems like this NATO membership with Article 5 comes not only with challenges for Israeli military action, but honestly, some level of deterrence for Turkish aggression because of Israel's major non-NATO ally status. I think that those of us who are more inclined to defend Israel tend to think more in terms of the threat to Israel and less about how it goes the other way. I feel the same way about Qatar.
Yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if they are actually if they have the same status as like the Qataris or the Pakistanis. I don't
Who
know
they?
if Israel, I don't know if Israel has that specific status.
Major
You
non-NATO
don't need
ally?
you don't need that to
Yeah.
know that they're, that they have a protected status here in the United States. When we talk about QME, when we talk about the memorandum of understanding, where we're providing them with the weapons platforms that they need to defend themselves,
Hmm.
and just the special bond that has long existed. Now, some people say that the bond is not as strong as it once was. I'm not sure I buy that. I think that Israel's taking it's taking a beating right now because of the war, but
Hmm.
I don't know if anything's fundamentally changed with American lawmakers. I still think that, informally, the interactions I've had on the Senate side in particular, unbelievable support across party lines. Um,
That's great to hear.
but but the question that I guess I grapple with is it's the formal process, this alliance, this NATO alliance that, once upon a time, NATO meant a lot more. Right
Hmm.
now,
Hmm.
I don't know what it means, right? And I think it's facing already one big test as it relates to the Ukraine Russia conflict. And there are other countries that have started to feel the brunt of this. The Poles, in particular, they're getting pretty nervous about, the Russians getting too close. Uh, and so, but that's one challenge. Then I think you have the Turkish one on the other. I think both of them are messy. And again, I mentioned this when we were talking about the headlines. Having Erdogan and Putin get together in Turkmenistan and have a sort of a friendly summit with the knowledge that these two men are just openly just dumping on NATO and making it an alliance that feels like it's impossible to sustain. These are the moments that make you nervous because you look out
Yeah.
around the world and you say, okay, there's a seven front war that's going on in the Middle East. You got Europe, the edge of Europe's on fire. NATO's under strain. How much more is the world gonna take here? There's a lot happening that you don't want to see.
Yeah. How hard is your stop at 3:15? We
Pretty.
haven't even touched on.
I've got another meeting at 3:15.
Oh, okay. We haven't even touched on Syria. Okay. Um, I guess I'll ask one question here. We'll try to make it a little fast. So giving you the opportunity to play Ottoman quarterback here. How are Syria and the Kurds being used as a political football when it comes to Turkish-Israeli relations?
Oh, I mean, look, the Turks, as I mentioned, they're in Syria. They're essentially, I mean, I don't want to say they're occupying it, but they have an enormous amount of influence in Syria right now. And it's military assets, it's intelligence assets, but it's also, I mean, at one point, I don't know if it's still the case, but the Turkish lira was the currency that was being used after the Assad regime fell. Turkish minders were in a ton of meetings. So in other words, They had personnel there making sure that the Syrian government was doing their bidding. They want to have construction contracts there. They see this as a potential to really, gain control of a proxy state in the same way that Iran had controlled the Assad regime for many years. And so the entire country of Syria right now, if you ask me, is leverage for the regime. And again, you're watching this tug of war happen between the pragmatic Arab states, the Iranians, and then the Muslim Brotherhood axis. They're all trying to gain control of this territory. It's a rare opportunity to be essentially the patron of a country like this. And so that's what they're angling for.
Yeah.
The Israelis are snarling at them, and in some cases have actually attacked Turkish assets. I don't know if Turkish personnel have been killed, but I do know that things belonging to the Turks have been destroyed. And so that makes Syria a very contested space
Yeah.
right now. And that's actually, I think, what's really interesting about Donald Trump trying to get in there. I think he wants the United States to have more influence as maybe a way to play referee between all these competing factions.
Yeah, it also threatens to put Turkey both on Israel's northern border and, should the ISF, it's not going to happen, but on Israel's southern border in Gaza. So
Right. And as
the
I
pieces
mentioned,
are
don't
falling
forget
into place.
they have at least some influence in Lebanon right now.
Yeah,
They've got some influence in Turkey. What they've done is they've taken over, and by the way, they're in Jerusalem.
Jordan. Yeah.
They're buying
Uh-huh.
up territory there. They have activists. There's a group called
Yeah.
Tika, Tika. They're very
Hmm.
active there. So they're putting assets on the ground all around Israel. It's the Ring of Fire version 2.0.
Well, meanwhile, Turkey and Israel have recently engaged in direct behind the scenes de-escalation talks. Do you see any pathway towards rapprochement between the two nations?
They've been talking about this for a long time. They've been trying to get to a better place. There've been
Hmm.
a bunch of phone calls and meetings. Right now, I just don't see
Yeah.
anything happening on this front, not with Erdogan's rhetoric being what it is, and not with the threats that he's posing to Israel. So no, I don't see a whole lot of positive coming out of this right now. Um, I think Israel is very likely going to have to teach some kind of lesson
Hmm.
here. And I don't know what that looks like, but I also don't really want to see it either,
Yeah.
because, it's a fine line that Israel will have to walk if they are going to take any kind of action against the Turkish military or the intelligence services. It was interesting. I was talking to an Israeli friend recently, and we were talking about the Turkish threat in Syria. And he says to me, if Israel was a serious country, we would have taken out these assets a long time ago. And that was kind of a moment for me where I kind of said, okay, wow. So you have people who know what they need to do, but are afraid to do it for
Yeah.
fear of what it could lead to next.
Yeah.
So that's, again, this gets back to your question of why has Israel not declared Turkey to be an enemy? Why are they are walking on eggshells right now? They really
Yeah.
are.
Okay. Last question under the wire. What does Am Yisrael Chai mean to you?
It's funny. It's not something that I go around saying, um, but I actually love it when I see it right now. When other people say it, I try to be as balanced as I can be as a political analyst. I think people know where I stand on a lot of things. And I certainly see, having studied in Israel, studied all of this stuff in Israel, I'm able to see it through Israeli lenses, but I'm also able to see a lot of these conflicts through the lenses of the other actors and what they are trying to get. At the end of the day, it's raw politics, right? But when I see people say "Am Yisrael Chai" or they sign notes to me with that at the end, um, I gotta say I really am heartened by October 8th Jews, as they're called. The people that kind of woke up on October 8th and just said, "Whoa, I need to be involved here." Um, and I think it's a lot of those people that have, people weren't saying this before. They're saying it now. So this is like an October 8th saying, if you will.
Yeah.
It's been revived. And it's an acknowledgement, I think, of people who, understand that we're living in a really challenging moment in history, and they're leaning into it. Um, and that actually that speaks volumes to me.
I love that. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And as they say in the old country, Am Yisrael Chai.
Thanks for having me.